You're listening to Storytime Audio. In today's episode, we delve into Unraveled Trust, the journey through a cheating wife's betrayal and the path to rediscovered love. This gripping tale follows Jake and Sarah, a seemingly perfect couple whose lives are upended by unexpected deceit. As secrets unfold and trust is shattered, Jake embarks on a heartfelt journey of self-discovery and healing. Join us as we explore the depths of betrayal and the resilience of the human spirit in this poignant story of love, loss, and redemption. Jake and Sarah had been married for 3 years when they moved to Chicago. Both in their early 30s, they were a loving couple who seemed to have everything going for them. Jake worked as a software engineer, while Sarah was a graphic designer. Their move to Chicago was prompted by Jake's job promotion, which brought with it a significant increase in salary and the opportunity to live in one of the most vibrant cities in the United States. Chicago, with its stunning skyline, deep dish pizza, and bustling cultural scene, offered a fresh start for the couple. They found a charming apartment in a quiet, leafy neighborhood, where they quickly began to settle into their new life. It wasn't long before they started making friends in their new community, thanks to their outgoing and friendly nature. One weekend, while attending a neighborhood barbecue, Jake and Sarah met Brad and Jenna. Brad was an investment banker, tall and charismatic, with a quick wit and an easy smile. Jenna, his wife, was a teacher, warm and engaging, with a knack for making everyone around her feel comfortable. The two couples hit it off immediately. They discovered shared interests, such as hiking, cooking, and a love for jazz music. Over time, the bond between them grew stronger, and they began to spend a lot of their free time together. Jake appreciated having friends like Brad and Jenna. It was reassuring to know that in a big city like Chicago, they had people they could rely on. Weekends were often spent exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, or hosting dinner parties at each other's homes. Jake and Brad enjoyed playing basketball at the local gym, while Sarah and Jenna often went for long walks along Lake Michigan, talking about everything from work to their dreams for the future. However, as time went on, Jake began to notice subtle changes in Brad's behavior towards Sarah. Brad was naturally flirtatious, but Jake started to feel uncomfortable with how often Brad complimented Sarah or found reasons to touch her arm during conversations. At first, Jake dismissed these feelings, convincing himself that he was being overly sensitive. Brad was their friend, and friends could be playful without any ulterior motives. Despite his attempts to ignore it, the feeling of unease continued to grow. One evening, after a particularly enjoyable dinner at Brad and Jenna's, Jake brought up his concerns to Sarah as they walked home. "Do you think Brad is a bit too friendly with you?" Jake asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "Friendly? How do you mean?" "I don't know, maybe it's just me, but sometimes it feels like he flirts with you a lot," Jake replied, feeling a bit foolish for even mentioning it. Sarah laughed softly. "Oh, Jake, you know Brad. He's just like that with everyone. It's harmless. Besides, Jenna doesn't seem to mind." Jake nodded, though Sarah's response didn't fully ease his concerns. He decided to let it go for the moment, not wanting to create unnecessary tension between them. Over the next few months, life continued as usual. Jake's job kept him busy, and Sarah had taken on several freelance projects that demanded much of her time. Their weekends with Brad and Jenna remained a regular fixture, but the undercurrent of discomfort Jake felt whenever Brad was around Sarah never entirely disappeared. One autumn afternoon, while Jake was working from home, he overheard Sarah talking on the phone in hushed tones. Curious but not wanting to intrude, he tried to focus on his work. However, snippets of the conversation floated to him, and he couldn't help but notice the secrecy in Sarah's voice. After she hung up, Jake decided to ask about it. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked casually as she walked into the living room. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering, "Oh, just Jenna. We were planning a surprise for you and Brad." Jake smiled, though the explanation didn't entirely convince him. He pushed the thought aside, attributing his suspicion to the stress of his job and the adjustment to their new life in Chicago. As their friendship with Brad and Jenna deepened, the four of them decided to plan a vacation together. Brad suggested a trip to a mountain resort in Colorado, a place he and Jenna had visited before and loved. The idea of a getaway sounded perfect to Jake and Sarah. They could all use a break from the hustle and bustle of city life, and the serene mountain setting promised relaxation and fun. The weeks leading up to the trip were filled with excitement and planning. Sarah seemed particularly enthusiastic, often texting and calling Jenna to discuss details. Jake was pleased to see her so happy but couldn't shake the nagging feeling of unease that had settled in the back of his mind. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. Jake and Sarah packed their bags and headed to the airport, where they met Brad and Jenna. The flight to Colorado was smooth, and the drive to the resort was filled with laughter and anticipation. The resort itself was stunning, nestled in the mountains with breathtaking views of the surrounding forests and peaks. The crisp autumn air and the colorful foliage created a picturesque backdrop for their vacation. Their first day at the resort was perfect. They hiked through the woods, marveling at the beauty of the changing leaves, and spent the evening around a cozy fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Jake felt his worries melt away as he enjoyed the company of his wife and friends. However, as the days passed, Jake's unease began to resurface. Brad's attentiveness towards Sarah seemed to intensify. He was always quick to offer her a drink, pull out her chair, or make her laugh with his jokes. Sarah, for her part, seemed to enjoy the attention, often laughing and engaging with Brad more than usual. One evening, as they were all sitting in the resort's hot tub, Jake noticed Brad's hand lingering on Sarah's shoulder a bit too long. He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his frustration in check. Jenna, sitting beside him, seemed oblivious to the interaction, engrossed in a conversation with Sarah about their plans for the next day. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Jake couldn't hold back any longer. "Sarah, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sure, what's up?" she replied, looking at him curiously. "I can't help but feel like Brad is crossing some boundaries," Jake said, choosing his words carefully. "It just feels like he's a bit too close to you." Sarah sighed, a hint of exasperation in her voice. "Jake, we've talked about this. Brad is just being friendly. You're reading too much into it." Jake nodded, not wanting to argue. "Maybe you're right. I'm probably just overthinking things." But deep down, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He decided to keep a closer eye on Brad and Sarah, hoping to either confirm or dismiss his suspicions. The next morning, they planned to visit a nearby lake for a day of kayaking and picnicking. The scenery was breathtaking, and the activities kept everyone busy and entertained. Jake tried to focus on the fun, enjoying the peacefulness of the lake and the laughter of their friends. As the sun began to set, they packed up their belongings and headed back to the resort. Jake offered to start the grill for dinner, while Sarah and Jenna prepared the sides in the kitchen. Brad joined Jake outside, bringing out a cooler of drinks. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Brad said, handing Jake a beer. "Yeah, it was perfect," Jake replied, taking the beer and opening it. As they chatted, Jake couldn't help but notice Brad's casual mention of Sarah in nearly every conversation topic. It was as if he couldn't go a few minutes without bringing her up. Jake's unease grew, but he kept his concerns to himself. After dinner, they all gathered in the living room to watch a movie. Jake sat beside Sarah on the couch, feeling a bit more at ease with her close to him. But his comfort was short-lived. Halfway through the movie, Brad got up to get more snacks, and when he returned, he chose to sit on the other side of Sarah, subtly edging closer as the night went on. The following day, Jake decided to address his concerns with Jenna. He figured that if anyone knew Brad well enough to provide some insight, it would be his wife. "Hey Jenna, can we talk for a second?" Jake asked while Sarah and Brad were outside checking out the hiking trails. "Sure, Jake, what's on your mind?" Jenna replied, looking a bit surprised. "I just wanted to ask you about Brad. Have you ever noticed him being a bit too friendly with Sarah?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual. Jenna laughed lightly. "Brad's always been a bit of a flirt, but it's harmless. He's just a friendly guy. I wouldn't worry about it." Jake nodded, though Jenna's response didn't entirely reassure him. "Yeah, you're probably right. Thanks, Jenna." As the day went on, Jake tried to enjoy their planned activities, but his mind kept drifting back to his suspicions. The final straw came that evening when they all went out dancing at a local club. Jake watched as Brad gravitated towards Sarah, constantly finding excuses to dance with her and touch her. Sarah seemed to be enjoying herself, laughing and dancing with Brad, seemingly oblivious to Jake's discomfort. Back at the resort, Jake couldn't hold back his frustration any longer. After everyone else had gone to bed, he confronted Sarah in their room. Sarah, this has to stop. Brad is way too close to you, and it's making me really uncomfortable, Jake said, his voice strained. Jake, I don't know what you want me to say. Brad is our friend. You're overreacting, Sarah replied, clearly annoyed. I'm not overreacting. I'm telling you how I feel. Can't you see that this is affecting our relationship? Jake pleaded. Sarah sighed, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Jake, I love you. But you need to trust me. Brad is just a friend. Nothing more. Jake looked at her, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. I do trust you, Sarah. It's Brad I don't trust. With that, Jake decided to let the conversation end, hoping that things would improve. But deep down, he knew that his unease wasn't going to go away easily. As the vacation neared its end, Jake tried to keep his worries at bay. However, the final day of the trip brought everything to a head. After a morning of hiking, they all decided to relax by the resort's pool. Jake volunteered to start grilling lunch, while Jenna went to grab some drinks. Sarah and Brad stayed by the pool, chatting and laughing. Jake's mind was racing as he stood by the grill. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Determined to find out the truth, he decided to check on Sarah and Brad. As he approached the pool area, he heard muffled voices coming from the laundry room nearby. Jake's heart pounded as he moved closer, straining to hear. The voices grew clearer, and Jake's worst fears were confirmed. He heard Sarah and Brad whispering intimately. Unable to hold back any longer, Jake flung open the door, his eyes widening in shock at the scene before him. Sarah and Brad were in the midst of an embrace, their clothes disheveled. The look of guilt on their faces said it all. Jake felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him. What the hell is going on here? Jake demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Sarah and Brad sprang apart, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jake, I can explain, she stammered, her eyes filled with tears. Jake shook his head, unable to believe what he was seeing. Explain? How can you possibly explain this? Brad stepped forward, trying to interject. Jake, listen, it's not what it looks like. We just got carried away. Carried away? Do you think I'm an idiot? Jake shouted, his anger boiling over. I trusted both of you, and this is how you repay me. Sarah reached out, but Jake recoiled, his heart breaking. Jake, please, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. A mistake? You call this a mistake? You've destroyed everything we had. Without another word, Jake turned and walked away, his mind reeling. He knew he couldn't stay there any longer. He needed to leave, to get away from the betrayal and the pain. Back in their room, Jake packed his bags in a daze, tears streaming down his face. Sarah followed him, begging for forgiveness, but Jake couldn't bring himself to look at her. Jake, please, we can work this out. I love you, Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. Jake shook his head, his heart heavy. I can't do this, Sarah. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me like this. As Jake left the resort, he felt a sense of finality. He knew that his marriage was over, and there was no going back. The drive back to Chicago was long and painful, filled with memories of what he had lost and the betrayal he had endured. In the days that followed, Jake began the process of filing for divorce. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement they had signed before their wedding, he knew that he wouldn't have to share his assets with Sarah. But the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Jake threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the pain. He confided in a few close friends, who offered their support and encouragement. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, was a rock of strength, reminding him that he deserved better and that time would heal his wounds. As the months passed, Jake slowly began to rebuild his life. He took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and focused on his career. Though the pain of Sarah's betrayal still lingered, he found solace in the knowledge that he had made the right decision. In the end, Jake learned valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the importance of listening to his instincts. He knew that he would never forget the pain of his broken marriage, but he also knew that he was stronger for having gone through it. And with that strength, he faced the future with hope and determination. As autumn deepened in Chicago, the city became a canvas of vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows. The crisp air and falling leaves added a sense of calm and beauty to the bustling city. Despite the scenic backdrop, Jake's unease about Brad's relationship with Sarah persisted, casting a shadow over what should have been an enjoyable season. Jake's job as a software engineer often required long hours, but he made a point to be present for Sarah. He started noticing changes in her behavior. Sarah, who once shared everything with him, began to seem distant. She often took her phone calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones, and her text messages became more frequent and private. Jake's gut feeling told him something was off, but he struggled to confront it directly. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Jake came home to find Sarah laughing on the phone. She quickly ended the call when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Who was that?" Jake asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Sarah hesitated for a moment before replying, "It was Jenna. We were just talking about the trip and making some plans for the holidays." Jake nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah wasn't being entirely truthful. He decided to keep his suspicions to himself for now, hoping that he was just being paranoid. Over the next few weeks, Jake's anxiety grew. He noticed that Sarah and Brad seemed to be spending more time together, often under the guise of planning events or coordinating activities for their group. Brad's flirtatious behavior continued unabated, and Sarah didn't seem to mind. If anything, she seemed to enjoy the attention. One Friday evening, Jake suggested they have a quiet night in, just the two of them. Sarah, however, insisted that they join Brad and Jenna for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. Reluctantly, Jake agreed, hoping that spending time with their friends might help ease his worries. The restaurant was chic and modern, with dim lighting and an intimate atmosphere. As they settled into their seats, Jake couldn't help but notice how close Brad sat to Sarah, his arm casually draped over the back of her chair. Throughout the meal, Brad and Sarah engaged in lively conversation, often excluding Jake and Jenna. Jake tried to join in, but he felt like an outsider in his own group. After dinner, they decided to have drinks at Brad and Jenna's apartment. Jake excused himself to use the restroom, and when he returned, he found Brad and Sarah in the kitchen, whispering and laughing. Jenna was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unaware. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach as he watched them. He decided it was time to address his concerns head-on. When they got home that night, he turned to Sarah, his voice filled with frustration. "Sarah, we need to talk. I can't keep ignoring this. Something's going on between you and Brad, and I need to know what it is." Sarah sighed, looking weary. "Jake, I've told you before, there's nothing going on. Brad is just a friend. A friend who can't seem to keep his hands off you." Jake shot back, his anger rising. "I'm not blind, Sarah. I see the way he looks at you, the way he touches you. It's not normal." Sarah looked down, her eyes avoiding Jake's. "Jake, you're overreacting. Brad is just affectionate. He's like that with everyone." "Not like this," Jake insisted. "This is different. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not." Sarah finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sadness. "Jake, I'm sorry if I've made you feel this way. But I promise you, there's nothing going on. You have to trust me." Jake wanted to believe her, but his instincts told him otherwise. He decided to keep a closer eye on things, determined to uncover the truth. As the days passed, Jake's suspicions only deepened. Sarah continued to be secretive, and Brad's behavior showed no signs of changing. Jake felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. One afternoon, Jake decided to work from home, hoping to surprise Sarah with lunch. He knew she had the day off and thought it would be a nice gesture. As he approached their apartment building, he saw Brad's car parked outside. His heart sank as he realized Brad was inside. Jake took a deep breath and headed upstairs. He unlocked the door quietly, hoping to catch them off guard. As he entered the apartment, he heard muffled voices coming from the living room. He moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the slightly ajar door, Jake saw Sarah and Brad sitting close together on the couch, their heads bent in conversation. Brad reached out and touched Sarah's hand, and she didn't pull away. Jake felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Unable to hold back any longer, Jake pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" Sarah and Brad sprang apart, their faces flushing with guilt. Sarah stood up, her eyes wide with fear. "Jake, it's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks pretty damn clear to me," Jake retorted, his voice shaking with anger. Brad stood up, trying to remain calm. "Jake, we were just talking. There's nothing going on." Jake shook his head, his eyes filled with hurt. "I've had enough of this. I can't keep living like this, wondering what's really happening behind my back. Sarah reached out to him, her voice pleading. Jake, please, you have to believe me. Brad and I are just friends. Friends don't act like this, Jake said, his voice breaking. I need some time to think. I can't do this right now. With that, Jake turned and walked out of the apartment, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He wandered the streets of Chicago, trying to make sense of everything. He knew he couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty and doubt. As evening fell, Jake found himself at a small park near the lake. He sat on a bench, staring out at the water, his thoughts racing. He thought about the life he had built with Sarah, the dreams they had shared, and the future he had envisioned. It all felt like it was slipping away. Jake pulled out his phone and called his mother, Mrs. Thompson. She had always been a source of strength and wisdom for him. As the phone rang, he felt a sense of relief, knowing he could lean on her for support. Jake, honey, is everything okay? Mrs. Thompson's voice was warm and comforting. No, Mom, it's not, Jake replied, his voice cracking. I think Sarah is having an affair with Brad. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mrs. Thompson spoke again. Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. What makes you think that? Jake explained everything to her, from Brad's flirtatious behavior to Sarah's secrecy and the incident he had just witnessed. Mrs. Thompson listened patiently, offering words of comfort and encouragement. Jake, you deserve to be with someone who loves and respects you, she said gently. If Sarah can't give you that, then maybe it's time to think about what's best for you. Jake nodded, wiping away tears. I know, Mom, I just don't know what to do. Take some time to think things over, Mrs. Thompson advised. But remember, you deserve to be happy. Don't settle for anything less. After hanging up with his mother, Jake felt a sense of clarity. He knew he needed to confront Sarah once and for all and get to the bottom of things. He couldn't continue living in this state of limbo. When Jake returned to the apartment, he found Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as he entered, her expression filled with sorrow. Jake, we need to talk, she said softly. Yes, we do, Jake agreed, sitting down across from her. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to get this far. What do you mean? Jake asked, his heart pounding. Brad and I, we got close. Too close, Sarah admitted, tears streaming down her face. It started off as harmless flirting, but it turned into something more. I'm so sorry, Jake. Jake felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over him. Why, Sarah? Why did you do this? I don't know, Sarah sobbed. I was lonely, and Brad made me feel special. But I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Jake. Jake shook his head, his mind reeling. I don't know if I can forgive this, Sarah. You've broken my trust. I understand, Sarah whispered, her voice filled with regret. But please, can we try to work through this? Jake looked at her, his heart heavy. I don't know, Sarah. I need time to think. With that, Jake stood up and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He knew that his marriage would never be the same again. As the days passed, Jake and Sarah tried to navigate the fragile state of their relationship. They sought counseling and attempted to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But despite their efforts, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that lingered in his heart. One evening, as they sat in their counselor's office, Jake made a decision. I can't do this anymore. I need to move on. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded in understanding. I understand, Jake. I'm so sorry for everything. With a heavy heart, Jake filed for divorce. The process was painful and emotional, but he knew it was the right decision. He couldn't continue living in a relationship that was built on broken trust. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Sarah moved out of their apartment, and Jake began the process of healing and rebuilding his life. He focused on his work, reconnected with friends, and leaned on his mother for support. As the months went by, Jake found solace in new hobbies and activities. He took up photography, capturing the beauty of Chicago through his lens. He also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the company of dogs and cats. Though the pain of Sarah's betrayal still lingered, Jake knew he was on the path to healing. He had learned valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the importance of listening to his instincts. He knew that he deserved to be with someone who loved and respected him fully. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Jake ran into an old college friend, Rebecca. They caught up over coffee, and Jake found himself drawn to her warmth and kindness. As they spent more time together, Jake began to feel a spark of hope for the future. Rebecca was patient and understanding, never pushing Jake to move faster than he was ready. She became a source of light in his life, helping him to see that there was still happiness to be found. As Jake looked back on his journey, he realized that the pain and heartbreak had made him stronger. He had faced the betrayal and come out the other side with a renewed sense of self-worth and determination. And with Rebecca by his side, he felt hopeful for the future. In the end, Jake learned that life could be unpredictable and challenging, but it was also full of opportunities for growth and new beginnings. He had faced his darkest moments and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever came next. As autumn turned to winter, Jake's life continued to be a mix of work, healing, and tentative steps toward a new beginning. The upcoming vacation to the mountain resort in Colorado, planned months in advance, seemed like the perfect escape from the turmoil of the past few months. Jake hoped the trip would provide some clarity and perhaps even a chance for a fresh start. The day finally arrived for their departure. Jake and Sarah packed their bags and headed to the airport, meeting Brad and Jenna there. The flight to Colorado was uneventful, and the drive to the resort was filled with scenic views of snow-capped mountains and sprawling forests. The resort itself was nestled in a picturesque valley, surrounded by towering peaks and frosted trees. It was a winter wonderland, the kind of place that seemed almost magical. The first day at the resort was everything Jake had hoped for. They went skiing, enjoyed hot cocoa by the fire, and ended the day with a cozy dinner at the resort's restaurant. Jake felt a sense of calm and contentment he hadn't experienced in months. He was determined to make the most of this trip, to find some peace and perhaps a path forward. The following day, they decided to take a hike to a nearby frozen lake. The hike was challenging but rewarding, with stunning views at every turn. Jake found himself laughing and joking with Brad, Sarah, and Jenna, feeling like things were finally beginning to fall back into place. However, the lingering doubts about Brad and Sarah's relationship were never far from his mind. That evening, they gathered around the fireplace in the main lodge, sharing stories and laughter. Jake noticed Brad's attentiveness towards Sarah once again but decided to push his concerns aside. He didn't want to ruin the trip with his suspicions. Instead, he focused on enjoying the moment. As the days passed, Jake's unease grew. Brad's behavior became increasingly bold, and Sarah seemed more and more receptive to his advances. One afternoon, while they were all relaxing in the resort's hot tub, Brad's hand lingered on Sarah's shoulder a bit too long. Jake clenched his jaw, trying to keep his frustration in check. Jenna, sitting beside him, seemed oblivious to the interaction. That night, as they prepared for bed, Jake decided he couldn't ignore his feelings any longer. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah looked at him, her expression wary. "What is it, Jake?" "I can't keep pretending everything is okay," Jake began. "Brad is way too close to you, and it's making me really uncomfortable." Sarah sighed, looking away. "Jake, we've been over this. Brad is just a friend. You're overreacting." "I don't think I am," Jake replied, his voice rising. "This isn't normal, Sarah. Friends don't act like this." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, please, you have to trust me. There's nothing going on." Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I want to believe you, Sarah. But it's hard when I see the way he looks at you, the way he touches you." Sarah reached out, taking Jake's hand. "Jake, I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you. Please, believe me." Jake looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity there. He wanted to believe her, to trust that she was telling the truth. "Okay, Sarah, I'll try." The next morning, they planned to spend the day exploring the nearby town. The quaint shops and cozy cafes provided a welcome distraction from the tension of the previous night. Jake found himself relaxing a bit, enjoying the charm of the town and the company of his friends. That evening, they decided to cook dinner together in their cabin. The kitchen was filled with laughter and the delicious smells of a home-cooked meal. Jake and Brad manned the grill while Sarah and Jenna prepared the sides. For a moment, everything felt normal, almost like old times. After dinner, they all settled in the living room to play board games. The friendly competition and shared jokes helped to lighten the mood. Jake felt a sense of relief, hoping that maybe things were starting to improve. But as the night wore on, Jake's suspicions crept back in. He noticed Brad and Sarah exchanging glances, their interactions filled with a familiarity that made him uneasy. When Brad offered to help Sarah clean up the kitchen, Jake's heart sank. He decided to follow them, hoping to catch a moment of truth. As he approached the kitchen, he heard hushed voices. Jake's heart pounded as he moved closer, straining to hear their conversation. "Brad, we have to be careful," Sarah whispered. "Jake is getting suspicious." "I know," Brad replied softly. "But I can't help how I feel about you." Jake felt a surge of anger and betrayal. He couldn't stand it any longer. He pushed open the door and stepped into the kitchen, his eyes blazing with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" Jake demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Sarah and Brad sprang apart, their faces flushing with guilt. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," Brad began, his voice shaking. "Really? Because it looks pretty damn clear to me," Jake shot back, his anger boiling over. Sarah reached out to him, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, please, let me explain." Jake shook his head, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Explain? How can you possibly explain this?" Brad took a step forward, trying to remain calm. "Jake, listen, we got close, too close. But it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" Jake echoed, his voice filled with disbelief. "You betrayed me, both of you. How could you?" Sarah sobbed, her hands covering her face. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Jake felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over him. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do this?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I was lonely, and Brad made me feel special. But I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Jake." Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I can't do this, Sarah. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me like this." Sarah's eyes filled with sorrow. "Jake, please, give me a chance to make it right." "I need time to think," Jake replied, his voice trembling. "I can't make any decisions right now." With that, Jake turned and walked out of the kitchen, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He wandered outside, the cold air biting at his skin, but he barely noticed. His heart felt heavy, weighed down by the betrayal and the pain. Jake found himself at a small clearing near the edge of the resort. He sat on a bench, staring out at the snow-covered landscape, his thoughts racing. He thought about the life he had built with Sarah, the dreams they had shared, and the future he had envisioned. It all felt like it was slipping away. After what felt like hours, Jake decided to head back to the cabin. He knew he couldn't avoid the confrontation forever. When he entered, he found Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. Brad and Jenna were nowhere to be seen. "Jake, we need to talk," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. "Yes, we do," Jake replied, sitting down across from her. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to get this far." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his heart pounding. "Brad and we got close." "Too close," Sarah admitted, tears streaming down her face. "It started off as harmless flirting, but it turned into something more." "I'm so sorry, Jake." Jake felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over him. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do this?" "I don't know," Sarah sobbed. "I was lonely, and Brad made me feel special. But I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Jake." Jake shook his head, his mind reeling. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Sarah. You've broken my trust." "I understand," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with regret. "But please, can we try to work through this?" Jake looked at her, his heart heavy. "I don't know, Sarah. I need time to think." With that, Jake stood up and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He knew that his marriage would never be the same again. As the days passed, Jake and Sarah tried to navigate the fragile state of their relationship. They sought counseling and attempted to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But despite their efforts, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that lingered in his heart. One evening, as they sat in their counselor's office, Jake made a decision. "I can't do this anymore. I need to move on." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded in understanding. "I understand, Jake. I'm so sorry for everything." With a heavy heart, Jake filed for divorce. The process was painful and emotional, but he knew it was the right decision. He couldn't continue living in a relationship that was built on broken trust. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Sarah moved out of their apartment, and Jake began the process of healing and rebuilding his life. He focused on his work, reconnected with friends, and leaned on his mother for support. As the months went by, Jake found solace in new hobbies and activities. He took up photography, capturing the beauty of Chicago through his lens. He also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the company of dogs and cats. Though the pain of Sarah's betrayal still lingered, Jake knew he was on the path to healing. He had learned valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the importance of listening to his instincts. He knew that he deserved to be with someone who loved and respected him fully. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Jake ran into an old college friend, Rebecca. They caught up over coffee, and Jake found himself drawn to her warmth and kindness. As they spent more time together, Jake began to feel a spark of hope for the future. Rebecca was patient and understanding, never pushing Jake to move faster than he was ready. She became a source of light in his life, helping him to see that there was still happiness to be found. As Jake looked back on his journey, he realized that the pain and heartbreak had made him stronger. He had faced the betrayal and come out the other side with a renewed sense of self-worth and determination. And with Rebecca by his side, he felt hopeful for the future. In the end, Jake learned that life could be unpredictable and challenging, but it was also full of opportunities for growth and new beginnings. He had faced his darkest moments and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever came next. The days following Jake's decision to file for divorce were a blur of emotions and legalities. Despite the prenuptial agreement simplifying the division of assets, the emotional toll was heavy. Sarah moved out, and Jake was left to confront the emptiness of their once shared home. Sarah's departure marked the beginning of a new chapter in Jake's life, but the transition was far from easy. The memories of their life together lingered in every corner of the apartment, making it difficult for Jake to move on. He threw himself into his work, hoping the distractions would dull the pain. However, every quiet moment brought back memories and the sting of betrayal. To cope, Jake sought solace in activities that brought him peace. Photography became his escape, allowing him to capture the beauty of Chicago and the world around him. Each click of the shutter was a step towards healing. He also dedicated time to volunteering at the local animal shelter, where the unconditional love of the animals provided a welcome respite from his turmoil. Rebecca, his old college friend, played a significant role in Jake's recovery. Their frequent coffee dates turned into long walks in the park, dinners, and shared moments of laughter. Rebecca's patience and understanding gave Jake the space he needed to heal. Her presence was a gentle reminder that life could still be filled with joy and companionship, even after the deepest betrayals. One chilly winter afternoon, as snowflakes gently fell from the sky, Jake and Rebecca sat in a cozy cafe, sipping hot chocolate. The warmth of the fireplace and the festive decorations created an atmosphere of comfort and hope. "You seem happier, Jake," Rebecca observed, her eyes filled with genuine concern. "How are you really doing?" Jake smiled, appreciating her concern. "I'm getting there, Rebecca. It's been a tough journey, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy." Jake felt a warmth spread through him at her touch. "Thank you for being here for me, Rebecca. I don't know what I would have done without you." Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly. "You don't have to thank me, Jake. I'm just glad I could be there for you." As they continued their conversation, Jake felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in a long time. He realized that, despite the pain and heartbreak, he was ready to open his heart again. In the months that followed, Jake and Rebecca's relationship deepened. They spent weekends exploring new places, trying out new hobbies, and simply enjoying each other's company. Rebecca's presence brought a sense of stability and joy back into Jake's life. Meanwhile, Jake's professional life flourished. His dedication to his work paid off, and he received recognition and promotions. His colleagues noticed the positive change in him, and his renewed enthusiasm inspired those around him. One evening, while Jake and Rebecca were having dinner at his apartment, she noticed a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of Jake and Sarah from their early days of marriage. Rebecca looked at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about her?" Rebecca asked gently. Jake glanced at the photo, then back at Rebecca. "Sometimes. It's hard not to." But I've come to realize that what happened with Sarah was a chapter in my life that needed to end for me to grow and find true happiness." Rebecca nodded, understanding. "I'm glad you found peace with it, Jake." Jake took her hand, looking into her eyes. "I have, Rebecca. And a big part of that is because of you." Rebecca smiled, her eyes shining with affection. "I'm just glad I could be there for you." As they finished their meal, Jake felt a sense of contentment. He knew that his journey to healing wasn't over, but he was confident that with Rebecca by his side, he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the spring, Jake and Rebecca decided to take a trip together. They chose a quaint cabin in the mountains, a place where they could escape the hustle and bustle of the city and enjoy each other's company. The cabin, nestled among towering trees and overlooking a serene lake, was the perfect retreat. The days were filled with hiking, fishing, and exploring the natural beauty around them. Evenings were spent by the fireplace, sharing stories and dreams for the future. For Jake, this trip was a chance to reflect on how far he had come and to appreciate the new chapter of his life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake turned to Rebecca. "I never thought I could find happiness again after everything that happened." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "Life has a way of surprising us, Jake. Sometimes, the darkest times lead us to the brightest moments." Jake nodded, taking her hand. "Thank you for being my light, Rebecca." Rebecca leaned in and kissed him softly. "And thank you for letting me be a part of your journey." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. He had faced his darkest moments and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Back in Chicago, Jake continued to build a new life. He and Rebecca moved in together, their relationship growing stronger each day. They made plans for the future, excited for the adventures that lay ahead. One day, while walking through the park, Jake spotted a familiar face. It was Sarah, walking alone, her expression somber. Jake's heart skipped a beat, but he knew he had moved on. He approached her, feeling a mix of emotions. "Sarah," he called out. Sarah turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jake, hi." They stood there for a moment, an awkward silence hanging between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. "How have you been?" Jake smiled softly. "I've been good, Sarah. How about you?" Sarah sighed, looking down. "I've had better days, but I'm trying to move on." Jake nodded, understanding the difficulty of her journey. "I hope you find happiness, Sarah." Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with regret. "Jake, I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you." Jake felt a pang of sadness but also a sense of closure. "I know, Sarah. It's all in the past now. We both need to move forward." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wish you all the best, Jake. You deserve it." "Thank you, Sarah. I wish you the same," Jake replied, feeling a sense of finality. As Sarah walked away, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced the person who had caused him so much pain and realized that he had truly moved on. He turned back to Rebecca, who had been watching from a distance, and smiled. Rebecca walked over, wrapping her arm around his. "Are you okay?" Jake nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "Yeah, I'm okay. I think I finally found closure." Rebecca smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad, Jake. You deserve to be happy." Jake looked at Rebecca, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love. "And I am, Rebecca. Thanks to you." As they continued their walk through the park, Jake felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. He knew that life would always have its challenges, but he also knew that he had the strength and support to face them. In the years that followed, Jake and Rebecca built a life filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. They traveled, started a family, and supported each other through thick and thin. Jake never forgot the pain of his past, but he also knew that it had shaped him into the person he was today. Looking back on his journey, Jake realized that the darkest moments had led him to the brightest ones. He had learned the importance of trust, the value of true love, and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. And with Rebecca by his side, he was ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that together, they could conquer anything. As time went on, Jake and Rebecca's relationship continued to blossom. Their shared experiences, mutual respect, and deep affection for each other created a strong foundation that carried them through life's ups and downs. They supported each other in their careers, celebrated milestones together, and found joy in the simple moments of everyday life. Jake's photography hobby turned into a passionate side project. With Rebecca's encouragement, he started an Instagram account to showcase his work. His unique ability to capture the essence of Chicago through his lens quickly gained a following. Before long, Jake was invited to exhibit his photos at a local gallery. The opening night was a success, with friends, family, and admirers gathering to appreciate his art. Rebecca was his biggest supporter, standing by his side with pride. "I knew you had talent, Jake, but this is incredible," she said, squeezing his hand as they mingled with the guests. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rebecca. Thank you for always believing in me." Their life together was filled with many such moments of joy and achievement. They adopted a dog from the animal shelter where Jake volunteered, naming him Max. Max quickly became a beloved member of their family, bringing endless energy and happiness to their home. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching Max play in the yard, Jake turned to Rebecca with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've been thinking about everything we've been through. The highs, the lows, all of it." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What's on your mind, Jake?" Jake took a deep breath. "I think we've come a long way, and I want to keep moving forward. With you, by my side, forever." Rebecca's eyes widened with surprise and joy as Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a beautiful engagement ring. "Rebecca, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Jake. 1,000 times, yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling an overwhelming sense of happiness and love. They embraced, knowing that this was the beginning of an even more beautiful chapter in their lives. Their wedding was a celebration of love, surrounded by friends and family who had supported them throughout their journey. Mrs. Thompson, Jake's mother, beamed with pride as she watched her son find true happiness. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden, with blooming flowers and twinkling lights creating a magical atmosphere. As they exchanged vows, Jake spoke from the heart. "Rebecca, you've shown me what true love and partnership mean. You've been my rock, my confidant, and my best friend. I promise to stand by you, to support you, and to love you for the rest of my life." Rebecca's voice trembled with emotion as she replied, "Jake, you've brought so much joy and light into my life. Together, we've faced challenges and celebrated victories. I promise to cherish you, to laugh with you, and to grow old with you." Their friends and family cheered as Jake and Rebecca shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. As the night drew to a close, Jake and Rebecca looked at each other with the knowledge that they had found something truly special. In the years that followed, their love only grew stronger. They traveled the world, exploring new places and creating memories together. Jake's photography continued to flourish, and Rebecca pursued her passion for writing, eventually publishing a book that received critical acclaim. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but their unwavering support for each other saw them through. When Rebecca experienced a health scare, Jake was there every step of the way, providing comfort and strength. When Jake faced a setback in his career, Rebecca's encouragement helped him find a new path. Their home was filled with love and laughter, a place where friends and family always felt welcome. Mrs. Thompson often visited, enjoying the warmth and happiness that radiated from their lives. Jake and Rebecca's bond with Max grew deeper, and they eventually adopted a second dog, Luna, who brought even more joy to their family. One sunny afternoon, as they sat in their backyard watching Max and Luna play, Rebecca turned to Jake with a smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Jake nodded, his eyes reflecting the love he felt for her. "All the time. I'm so grateful for everything we've been through, and for you, Rebecca. You've made my life better in every way." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you've done the same for me, Jake. I can't imagine my life without you." As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty of their home and the love they had built, Jake felt a deep sense of contentment. He knew that life would always have its challenges, but with Rebecca by his side, he was ready to face anything. Looking back on his journey, Jake realized that every experience, both good and bad, had led him to this moment. The pain of his past had made him stronger, and the love he had found with Rebecca had given him a new sense of purpose and joy. Jake had learned valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the importance of staying true to oneself. He knew that he deserved to be happy and that with Rebecca, he had found a love that was worth fighting for. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over their backyard, Jake and Rebecca looked forward to the future with hope and excitement. They knew that together, they could conquer anything and that their love would continue to grow and flourish. In the end, Jake's journey was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the belief that even in the darkest times, there is always a path to happiness and fulfillment. And with Rebecca by his side, Jake knew that the best was yet to come. Thank you for tuning in to Storytime Audio. We hope you found Unraveled Trust, the journey through a cheating wife's betrayal and the path to rediscovered love, as captivating and heartfelt as we did. Jake's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope and a chance for new beginnings. Stay with us for more powerful stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience and redemption. Until next time, keep listening and let the stories guide you.